Hello, my name is Mark Elliot, Professor of Data Science in the School of Social Sciences at the University of Manchester. I'm going to be talking about these three topics: data, automation, and the human technology nexus. I'll go through each in turn and then I'll give some thoughts about the impact on privacy at the end of the talk. First, data. Now, you'll undoubtedly have come across this term, big data, and I should say at the beginning, I don't personally use the term. I think it's unhelpful, it's vague, imprecise, and I always demand precision of people when they use the term. What actually are you talking about? What type of data? And why are you using the term big? Computer scientists tend to use the terms volume, velocity, variety, and other V's to describe what they mean by big data. However, I don't necessarily find these helpful either, and I'm after thinking about what specific forms of data are you meaning. In actual fact, I prefer the term data environment to mean what people sometimes mean by big data, and that is a collection of different resources, sometimes open, sometimes not, but specifically data that are linked together, different forms of data that are brought together, merged, combined, enhanced in various different ways towards analytical outcomes, towards policy outcomes, towards business decision making. Another element which I think is really important, which doesn't necessarily come up in the V's type formulation, is real-time, the real-time nature of data and analytics, not just in the fintech sector as represented on this slide, but in other sectors increasingly as well. Policy decision making being made in real time. I'll come back to that shortly. This brings us on to the notion of automation. Thinking about the way that data has developed over the course of the last 100 years, during the 20th century we were increasingly collecting intentional data that was intended to be data. However, towards the end of the 20th century and certainly into the 21st, a new form emerged: administrative or routine data. Data was collected in parallel with some service to represent or support that service. And transactional data that is being collected in order to provide the service or to sell you the product is one form of that. And then more recently we've had user-generated data. Now, this has always been going on. A diary is user-generated data, but the scale and scope of it has massively increased during the 21st century. And then more recently, in the last 10 years, particularly the last 5, we have automated data, automatic collection of data by instruments, by sensors, by various forms of technology. Let's think about the data research cycle. So you might have some data, you carry out some analysis, that gives you some research findings. Those research findings have impact, which produce changes in policy, which in turn leads to changes in behaviour. At least that's what you hope. This in turn leads to new data. And this may take months or even years as the research data process. We're now moving towards this being a much more common cycle, the data policy analytics cycle. Here, that you might think about something rather than as a research process, as a control process, not necessarily in the Big Brother sense, but in an engineering sense, where it has some sort of dial or thermostat where you control the process and get immediate feedback on it in terms of the data that are regarding that process and its outcomes. And this moves us on to the human technology nexus. So here are some ontology statements. First of all is socio-technological. We're moving into a phase of human development where we're so embedded into our technology that we regard everything as socio-technology, and we lack in academia and elsewhere a relevant discipline or mode of studying and thinking about this. We're siloed into engineering, science, computer science, mathematics, social sciences, and we really need an integrated discipline to think about these particularly complex socio-technological issues. Human identities, on the other hand, are embracing the digital. Humans are merging with their artifacts. We've not yet crossed the Rubicon predicted by Ray Kurzweil, but it is close. Understanding now lags behind socio-technological development. So these things are happening, whether we like it or not. We're very good at inventing new things, but we don't really understand what it all means for us as human beings, our societies, our political systems, and so on. Let's just talk about a few of the technologies. So this is a drone, you'll probably recognise it. It's a very particular sort of drone. It's a drone that's controlled by human thought. It's a drone where there is no hands involved in the control of it. The electrodes on the human driver's head mean that by having one thought or another, the drone goes left or right or up or down, faster or slower. And this technology is rapidly increasing in complexity. There are now sports, particularly in the US, where people race against each other using these drones. This is a similar technology where one human being is physically controlling the other just by the power of thought. Now I'm going to run on to an experiment where the University of Maryland ran. It's actually 2012, so it's nearly 9 years old now. So this was run in 10 different countries, and essentially all it was they asked students in 10 different countries to give up their technology for 24 hours. And one of the headlines was that only half the students made it through the 24 hours before, as it were, crawling back into the depot to collect their technology. These statements are the statements of those that made it through the 24 hours. And you can see that it is the language of addiction, the language of a broken relationship, the language of grief. So the connection between ourselves and our technology is already getting very tight. One little anecdote: 2008, Barack Obama was elected President of the United States, and during the early years of his presidency, he made a big thing about family time, and that all the family should be unplugged, unwired, not connected to the internet whilst they were having the family time. So the next slide is a picture of the 2012 inauguration, so just a few years later. And this is perhaps not surprising. It's a very common image. At meetings, we're waiting around for something to start. We're on our phones, iPads, and other technology. But this family picture, and that's what it is a representation of where we're going, where we are and where we're going. Now I'm going to move on to some closing remarks on the topic of privacy. Privacy is primarily about individuals, about people. It's stuff about persons. It's related to identity. It is often confused with this other thing, confidentiality. Confidentiality is solely and completely about information, data. Privacy is not primarily about information and data. Confidentiality is a boundary condition around data. So if I say I'm telling you this in confidence, I'm asking you to participate in drawing a boundary around you and I, where data or information will not pass, a particular thing that I'm sharing with you. Similarly, with duty of confidence, with doctors and patients, or with a security system where you build a wall. All of this is about confidentiality. It is not about privacy, primarily. So technical processes, which often get called privacy, anonymization, statistical disclosure control, and even the misnomer differential privacy, are all examples of confidentiality systems and should not be mistaken for privacy systems. So in this context and all the things I've just been saying, the change in our relationship to information is making this a much more confusing situation to think about and to reason about and to develop policy about. Privacy is really important for individual autonomy and for decision making and for the development of our individual identities. It's inherently bound up with that. And therefore, what happens with these elements in terms of our control over our information and our digital identities will have a profound impact on what we mean by I, by what we mean by us, and what societies we are developing into. We need to be able to think about this, and for that we need a well-developed science, a well-developed social science of socio-technical systems. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the festival.